All right, I'm Doug White, and it's the Security Weekly News, episode 226. Welcome to the week of 24 July 2022. We've got killer robots, UEFI, LinkedIn, Ducktail, Costa Rica, T-Mobile, Prestashop, and we have special guest David Monnier from Team Comrie. I knew I'd get it. I was going to probably blow it once, but I just messed it up that one time. So stick around.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cyber criminals are hiding in the conversation. Cyber criminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of the 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection by going and getting your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. Firemon helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. Firemon has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With Firemon, compliance reports take a tenth of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with Firemon. Visit securityweekly.com/Firemon to learn more.
All right. So, a new phishing campaign, which has been named Ducktail, and I could not find why they called it that. I don't even know what Ducktail means. It's like a weird term, but it's called Ducktail. Apparently, the campaign targets professionals on LinkedIn to try and take over Facebook business accounts. So, and they're particularly looking for people that manage the advertising for a company. So it's a spear phishing campaign, and it's apparently aimed at a very, very specific target audience. So With Secure reported this campaign. They said that they believe it's a Vietnamese threat actor. And according to the article, they said they've been tracking this threat actor since 2021, and they believe they've been doing this since about 2018. So basically what they do, and I know you know all this, and we all know this about, but I wanted to reiterate this about LinkedIn. So basically they reach out via LinkedIn. They look at people who are working that have listed various and sundry tags on their name that they work in digital media, they work in digital marketing, and all these kind of things. And then they target the specific people that have those listings who may or may not be managing Facebook business accounts. They try to get them, and then, of course, this is the attack part of it. They try to get them to download a file off of Dropbox or iCloud. It's a JPEG, and apparently the file is very relevant to the discussion. And the one they were showing was somebody that had like a massage business, and they were showing like massage tables and all this stuff. But there's also an executable which looks like a PDF document, which is like information or whatever. So when you download the PDF, it's got a .NET Core malware executable in it, and of course .NET Core, if it's compiled, will run on just about anything. So once you run that, once it happens, it scans your browser cookies, targets Facebook credentials. All the information stolen included cookies, IP addresses, account information, including emails, names, birthdays, anything they could get, multi-factor code, geolocation data, etc. And then it tries to obtain business-specific info, which included stuff like your advertising limits, your user list, your client list, ID, currency, payment, whatever they can get. So all the grim details of this are in the article. And the biggest reason I sort of put the story on there was you may want to push some reminders out to your media people and all your people in general, because I know that LinkedIn is sort of considered safe, but so some reminders. And speaking of LinkedIn, I included this article, so the second article, because this was in the Washington Post, and I thought it was shareable to your employees, because it is about how to set up your LinkedIn privacy. Now, I'm bad about this too. Everybody sort of looks at LinkedIn and they think of it as a professional social media site. It's not like Facebook or WhatsApp or any of this kind of stuff. It's much more, I think, professional feeling than these personal things. And so people sort of inherently trust it more and think, well, this is not like that. But that's, bad move. If you wear a necktie and you speak with authority, it's totally different than if you're wearing a hoodie. I mean, like one time I literally got removed from a Mercedes lot because I stopped and was looking at a car, and this salesperson came running out in their like Armani suit, and I had on a shirt and flip flops, and they were like, he was literally like, "Sir, you need to leave the premises. I think there's a used car dealership on down the road there." And I was like, "What?" But I actually decided to test that. I went back 2 days later, and I was wearing my suit from work. And when I went on the lot that time, they got me a bottle of water, took me inside, and let me sit in an expensive car in the showroom. Yeah, it was a very, very different experience. Anyway, people don't tend to think about LinkedIn as a privacy risk, even though they put their whole life on there, especially if they're looking for jobs or whatever, see story one. And LinkedIn does not protect your visibility by default, but you can set up all sorts of different privacy features on LinkedIn that will allow people not to see who you are when you're looking at things and so forth. And this article that I linked onto the show is a guide to a bunch of privacy settings. For instance, their number one recommendation is to set yourself to anonymous when you're browsing other sites, because a common tactic, of course, is to put up a juicy ad and then capture info when people come to the ad to look at it. And they may actually go so far as to send you then like malware. But there's a whole list there. You might want to read it and put together a policy or a guide for your people. But the article itself is, it's a pretty good readable score, and it has basic instructions on how to do all this stuff as well. So check that one out. UEFI, and yes, I refuse to say UEFI. I don't care. I'm going to do it my way. I've been saying it longer than you have, so I can say whatever I want. UEFI has always been a boogeyman to scare people. And I mean, but it's a real boogeyman. I mean, UEFI compromise scares me a lot. And according to this article, Chinese language hackers have been using UEFI rootkits since as early as 2016 to put firmware images on certain motherboards. Now, they only had 2 motherboards in this example, but that doesn't mean there's not others. So Kaspersky named this Cosmic Strand. But apparently this same thing was reported several years ago by Chihu 360, who called it Spy Shadow Trojan. So 2 different reports on this. Researchers found that this firmware, which was on Asus and Gigabyte motherboards, was actually in the firmware. So UEFI, if you don't remember, stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, and this is the system that acts between the hardware and is part of the firmware to link the operating system to the hardware. So it's a very important component of the system, and it's the very first thing that boots, right? So this is what loads up. So there's this sort of ROM undercarriage, then it loads this UEFI, and then that is all used to link the hardware into the OS when the OS starts to load. Now, we all know that in these modern ones, that UEFI BIOS, you can log onto the internet, you can download firmware, you can do all kinds of stuff from within that UEFI world that is sitting there when you pull that up by pressing the delete key or F2. And, it is convenient to do these kind of things, but you can't really do much about what UEFI does or see what it's doing when it loads, and you really can't control the process very much. And if it gets infected, it is really, really hard to clean, because if it's in the firmware and it's hiding there, even though you may try to update or reflash it, it may still prevent you from doing that or act like it did it and still actually be there. So some of these things that we've seen in the past actually reinstall themselves even when you were trying to overwrite them and so on and so forth. So, even if it's that low level. So it's a very, very dangerous thing. But in this particular case, the firmware came with a modified driver called CSM Core DXE. And this is some kind of legacy boot process, as the name would imply. And basically, it allows this boot process to occur, and then the driver introduces malicious code into your system. So this is going to happen no matter how many times you reboot the machine. The 2 chipsets that they found this in were in Asus and Gigabyte motherboards that have the H81 chipset. So this is old. 2013 to 2015 was when they were using that chipset. And, and a lot of times people immediately go, oh, yeah, okay, that's, years ago. I think, and I did not drive over there and check after I read this story, but I'm going to. In my lab, we probably have some of these motherboards, because we used to buy Gigabyte motherboards all the time, and I'll bet you we have some from that time period. So I'm going to check and see if maybe some of those actually have that. So if you bought these for your company, they may, your whole company may have these motherboards in it. And not everybody updates motherboards, every year or every 5 years even. So I'm sure there's some of these out there in use. So anyway, to place this stuff, though, the actor would have had to have physical access to the original device or some kind of malware that was capable of patching the firmware image. So if that firmware was loaded on the machine, it had that. All the infected machines that they identified were private individuals in China, Iran, Vietnam, and Russia, and they could not tie this to any particular organization or industry. So it's not really clear what this was for, if it was ever used or anything else. So it's kind of just one of those research projects. And, it's not the first UEFI malware that we've ever seen, which I think was LoJack's, and it probably won't be the last one we're going to see either. So it's definitely a thing. It's definitely out there, and it's a very nasty little trick. Back in 2020, Conti ransomware gang breached the Costa Rican government for about 5 days. This report was out from Intel, and they have all the details of the steps that the Russian-based hackers took from their initial intrusion to their exfiltration of 672 gigabytes of data on April 15th of that year. They also have information about how the ransomware was executed and so forth. A very comprehensive report. The report says that the attack started at the Ministry of Finance, and it was conducted by a member named Member X who used a VPN to connect to the network using valid credentials, which had been compromised. Apparently, the credentials were obtained via malware, which was installed on the original sort of device, patient zero, in the network. It did not say how that was installed, and they may not know, but probably it was the usual phishing, email vectors, and so forth, or maybe Taco Truck Tuesday, USB sticks, or something like that. I mean, there's so many ways to get malware in, but they had set up more than 10 Cobalt Strike beacon sessions right away. They gained local domain admin access. They used NL Test to enumerate the domain trust. Then they scanned for file shares using ShareFinder and AdFind. Then they used Mimikat's post-exploitation tool to exfiltrate credentials and got the logon password and hashes for all the local users. It's an interesting report, and there's a lot of details here. I found ways that I could make my attack script better, and yes, my attack script was white hat for a lab, but it was very insightful thing, so check it out. T-Mobile has offered to settle a class action suit, and I love these things. The lawyers get 33% of the settlement, but the amount you would get, $4, $4 shiny gold US dollars. Now, since there's 880 million people in this class that are suing, that's a large number of participants in the class. T-Mobile announced they would provide $350 million for the settlement, and of course that somehow translated to each person getting $4. Which I'm guessing some of that. The law firm in this case they did not publish the whole settlement, so maybe not, but typically the law firm's trying to get around $100 million in this settlement, but the victims get $4, which is not quite a round trip on the subway, which would be $5.50. Justice is served. But the sum is not a very big number for you or for T-Mobile, which had $80 billion in revenue just in the United States in the last 12 months. So, call it a slap on the wrist. The law firm gets a big payout, and you'll get a check for $4 in the mail if they approve it. It has not been approved at this point, but the breach did result in the loss of Social Security numbers, driver's license numbers, names, etc. I don't know why T-Mobile had people's Social Security numbers. Maybe it was employees. I don't know. But I hate these stupid things because, it's just a law firm. It's going to get a lot of money, and you're going to get $4 for filling out a form to claim the $4. But the settlement has not been approved by the SEC. I don't even think you buy a bag of chips for $4, right? I don't know. Bill Gates got all that grief for not knowing the price of a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk. And I am not rich by a long shot, but I do not know what a loaf of bread costs, and I wouldn't even want a gallon of milk because what would you do with it? But, you could make ice cream, I guess. If you had a gallon of milk, I guess you could make ice cream. But I don't know what it costs. So I do know how much a bottle of Matilda Pois and Tanqueray costs. So, I guess that makes me a drunk. It's 4 o'clock somewhere. Prestashop is an open source e-commerce platform, issued a public advisory that there is a 0 day, and this article is very confusing to me. They issued it that there was a 0 day which uses SQL injections that is being used in the wild and hitting merchant servers to plant code which can exfiltrate customer payment information. The defect may impact up to 300,000 third-party merchants who use this platform. Now, Prestashop is a Google partner and is used in shops in the United States and Europe and probably elsewhere as well. But they have released patches for some of the vulnerabilities that they list in this article. They started with 0-day, then they went to all these other vulnerabilities, and they kind of came back and they said that maybe there was a 0-day. It was a very confusing article. But Prestashop said attackers were targeting shops with outdated software or other modules, or maybe a possible 0-day. Even though they started with saying there was a 0-day. There was some confusion to me about whether this 0-day was part of the article or they were mostly talking about the 1-day vulnerabilities that were patched or what. But maybe there could be a 0-day. But regardless, we don't know what's there, but there could be. Anyway, after the attack, they inject fake payment forms onto the front office checkout page, and then that captures the payment information and exfiltrates it. Prestashop said that the attackers might be using MySQL Smarty cache storage features as a part of an attack vector, so then they went in another direction, and they recommended that feature be disabled, which is always wonderful to hear. There are links to instructions and such if you are using this product, and of course, obviously, you should patch it immediately if you are. Today, David Monnier, the chief evangelist at TMobile, joins us. David has a lot of experience in this space and sounds a lot like me if I was smarter and more successful. So, welcome, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, sir. Thank you for having us on the show.
Yeah, so one of the things that you immediately were telling me about was ASM, and I thought maybe you'd tell us a little bit about the ASM stuff that you're working on.
Sure, happy to. So, first, little background about Team Cumry, I guess. So Team Cumry, we are, historically, we're an intelligence provider that went to help people augment their products. Our threat intelligence is in many of the security products that people make use of in the marketplace every day. There's a really good chance that your firewall is informed by intelligence we found yesterday, overnight tonight, and that's why today your firewall knows to block some command and control servers. That historically had been our main business, and in order to do so, we went out and have worked with the ISP, IXP, transit world, and whatnot to help them with their problems, and in return, get visibility. So as we had been working with them, we pay very close attention to the security industry. We're not, we don't consider ourselves, or didn't consider ourselves, more than a supplier to the security industry. We weren't really trying to be in the security business. We're focusing on the intelligence business. And one of the things that we realized, or that we saw, was that there was this opportunity for us to help augment products in the attack surface management space. And what we thought was an obvious fit was the application of threat intelligence and more specifically, let's say, reputational data related to attack surface management. And you could kind of overlay the two and help get a better understanding of, for example, just context around what a normal ASM solution would find. Like say, oh, hey, it looks like you have this vulnerability, because normal attack surface management is identify an asset, then scan that asset. Typically, assets are defined, at the IP address level or a domain level, and then you scan that asset for vulnerabilities, and then if it has vulnerabilities, you move on to some type of remediation. If not, you continue to watch it for behavioral changes, things like that. So we saw it was like an obvious fit for us to try to apply threat intelligence on top of that so that you could tell the difference, for example, between, hey, we didn't know we had this asset, and by the time we found it had a vulnerability. Well, kind of traditional ASM kind of stopped there. But what we've added is the determination of, is it possible that this device was already compromised before you are coming around to the chance to even try to patch it? And then obviously, as a result, rebuilding a system is a completely different exercise than trying to patch a system or mitigate a system. And so when you think of outcomes then, and I'm sure we've all encountered these situations where you go out, you identify that there's some vulnerability, but by the time you get to address the vulnerability, it's already been exploited. And then you're kind of removing the way that an attacker gained access previously, but you're not actually removing the attacker. And worse, you're kind of giving yourself this false sense of hope that, you caught it before it was bad. So we saw that as like an obvious fit. But when we came out and kind of surveyed the marketplace, we discovered that nobody's products had that capability. Nobody's products were really looking to add that capability. So basically, we set out to do it ourselves. So we had an acquisition with a firm in Israel that had an ASM solution, and we have since we're going through the process now of getting that product launched, and that's called Team Cumry Pure Signal Orbit. All of our tools tie back to this kind of pure signal theme, because again, that's where we get our start is kind of in this global visibility. Our other solution, Pure Signal Recon, is a platform where people can ask questions of the data that we see globally to get context around adversarial behaviors or context around just specific events. If you have an IP or a domain that you need to know more about, our tools do that. So, but our hope is to, for lack of a better word, let's call it next level attack surface management.
Cool. Well, so I want to throw out two people first. I want to throw out the big guys. I want to throw out the rich people, because if they need a solution, they just buy one. I mean, whatever the one they want is, they buy it. And I'm going to throw out the poor guys. I know that sounds awful, but the really small biz people cannot afford anything. I mean, they're literally just kind of out there and never land. But let's just talk about the people sort of in the middle there, that group that's growing and whatever. What would you say, like, the first step? Because I get asked this question a lot. What is the first step you would recommend to somebody that is starting to evaluate this attack surface management? Because this is a big question for a lot of people. Like, what do we, they don't even sometimes know what it is, and you start trying to describe it, and they just go, oh my God, because they don't have asset list. What would be a good first step for somebody to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, because we weren't in this space and we're trying to understand it, the very first thing we did was conduct large set of research, right? We're an intelligence shop. We have a lot of intelligence analysts. We have a lot of people who understand how to collect information, how to dissect it, how to understand it, so on. So we set out to kind of understand the security marketplace, in particular around ASM. And what we found was that the marketplace was very unhappy with the way things were. Like to the tune of like 50% of people who had ASM were planning on getting rid of it in the next year. And most of them, as you described, they cited cost or return on investment. And so the very first thing that we set out to do was understand what were the differentiators between where the market was and where it was going. And the thing that we found was there seems to be a large delta between the people who know that they should have ASM and those people who've been told they need ASM. And what I'm talking about in the latter is kind of where you're putting this thing in place because of regulatory need, right? But what we found is the first thing that people need to do is understand that ASM is a time-saving effort, right? ASM is the amalgamation of multiple what had been previously standalone functions, which is asset discovery and management, patch and vulnerability management. And then continuous, scanning and vulnerability assessment of your assets. So the first advice that we tend to give people is, once you realize that you need this, so again, not because you've just been told to go get this, but once you realize to have these all together in one interface with one tool that's managing all of this, that we can affect policy directly from one place, is you have to be willing to use it. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but one of the realities that often gets overlooked when people can consider ASM is that the first time you run it, in particular the first time, there's a high likelihood that you're going to discover assets you didn't realize you had. In particular, what we like to call shadow IT, right? Where, let's say, your development team needed to stand up an instance of your product. They brought over data to work with it. Maybe it's customer data. Hopefully it's dummy data, but that's not always the case. But even if it's dummy data, sometimes it's sensitive schemas. Sometimes it's, API components that you just don't want exposed. But we see all the time where those assets, nobody knows that they exist. And they run the tool for the first time and they say, oh, wow, I didn't realize they had all these additional devices. So they sometimes hear those stories and are afraid to get involved with ASM for fear that work comes out the other side. They run it and discover that they have a bunch of things to do. So that's the first piece of advice I have for people is be willing to do something with what you find. But as far as product selection goes, if your product isn't informing you, if you have to do a lot of informing of your product, meaning if you have to do a lot of effort to define what this product should be looking at in your infrastructure, you probably don't have a modern ASM solution. And by modern, I'm talking about one that is using globally collected insight to look for things that are likely yours that you didn't know were there, and from a global perspective, not just not just crawling for what it thinks is yours, which again kind of goes back to this problem of you had to inform it. These are the network prefixes I use and so on. But imagine if you're in AWS, if you don't know specifically all of the IP addresses from the specific zones you're in, it's unlikely you're going to scan all of that stuff. So definitely look for specifically tools that have a degree of either machine learning or some method of self-informing.
Yeah, so my story on that was back in 2004. It was SOX, it was Sarbanes-Oxley stuff, and we were evaluating companies, and I wrote this software. It wasn't software really; it was just a bunch of scripts that I wrote that went out and scanned people's networks because the term attack surface management didn't even exist in 2004. And I was just talking to people about you really need to know what's in your network, right? What is all this stuff? And again, it was exactly like you said. They didn't want to know. Because when they found out, it was bad. And so my story was we were scanning a network. We started seeing weird traffic. We didn't know what it was. It was going off-site, and it was a regular stream of data that was just going off-site and coming back, going off-site, coming back. So it wasn't encrypted, so we started capturing the packets. It was customer information. So I'm like, where's this going? And nobody knew. They were all like, we don't know what that is. And I'm like, okay. And of course, the IT people were like, I think it must be a hack or something. And so we tracked it down. We got the IP. We connected to it. Using internal credentials, we connected to it, and literally it was an AS400. I put a system message onto the machine that said, who are you and why are you connected to my network? And this person called. And they were like, oh, yeah, my name's X, and about 5 years ago I got laid off, and I love the AS400. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And I brought the AS400 to my house and was managing their AS400 with customer data from their home for free, and the company didn't even know about it. And this thing had millions of customer records on it. Full on. It was unencrypted. It was accessible from outside. It was insane. And we took that back to management. They're like, see, this is why we didn't want to do this process. Because you know what's going to cost us to bring that back in-house? You're like, dude, that's not the point. That's not the point at all. And I'm like, and of course, this was a person who made, there's like a CEO who's making $30 million a year, and they're like yapping because they got to spend an extra 100 this year. I'm like, right. Really? You just got to.
I wish it was a unique story. I really do. I wish it was a unique story, but unfortunately, that happens all the time, man. All over the place.
We saw it over and over again. We go out, we do I use those same scripts at a huge number of companies, and every time I did it, we would find stuff, and it was the same kind of story. Email servers that had been taken to some IT guy's house. He still got it running. I did one where the person had literally taken all of the servers from a town and put them in his apartment to protect his job. So when they tried to fire him because he supposedly was trying to blackmail some people, he basically said, well, that's great and all, but all the servers are in my apartment. Good luck getting them. And just stuff like that. And you're going, what? This is nuts. And the sort of, academic security part of me was just like, how can this even happen? But then I remembered companies I work for, and exactly, I took stuff home all the time. I took an email server home from a large institution because they wanted me to manage it. They wanted me to manage it 24/7 for nothing. And I was like, well, I'll have to take it home so I can do it, and they were like, yeah, that's okay. Just take it home. Okay, sure. That won't cause any long-term problem. But, back in the 90s, who knew? It was like, there's like,
sure.
So what? That's really cool. I mean, I think attack surface management is a huge deal. I think it's a big deal for small companies, big companies. Any advice for really small companies like startups and just really small companies? I mean, they're probably left out of so much of this.
The really small folks, I think, ASM, ASM is a scalable, as far as license goes. It's typically, scaled on what your infrastructure looks like. So if you have a small footprint, in theory, you'll have a smaller cost of entry. And it's important to keep in mind that ASM really is a time saver. I mean, sure, you can use Excel and hope you track all your assets, and you can maybe Nmap scan your known address prefix every day and look for changes, to see if new devices are plugged in. But the reality of distributed computing and the way the future is going, even if you're a small shop, I still think the automated discovery stuff is incredibly powerful. It not only help you find your true assets, but it'll also help imposter assets as well. There's a lot of value to it, and like I said, it's a time saver. So though it is perhaps a new concept to the folks that are watching, or perhaps it's something that they see as disparate functions that don't necessarily obviously fit together, I would encourage people to still take a look at it and consider, would it be good for me to have all of this stuff in one package? Personally, I think at the end of the day, the answer to that is yes, because it unifies that asset control with the policy controls that go on top of it.
I completely 100% agree. Thank you, David, for joining us from Team Cymru. That was exciting. And finally, even chess bots can be sore losers. At the Moscow chess tournament on the 19th, a robotic player, which is really just a disembodied arm that moves pieces and plays 3 different games at the same time, apparently decided it had enough and broke a child player's finger. I mean, it was this juicy, big, fat headline, right? You're going, uh-oh, it's Skynet, it's over, run for the hills. Nah. Basically, they've been using this thing for 15 years. It's just a robotic arm, and it actually gets commands from chess programs and chess software, and nobody's ever gotten hurt. It didn't decide to turn on everybody or turn sentient or anything like that. It did make a lot of viral video, and the kid is fine. Apparently, the way the arm works is it expects that after it makes a move, there will be a certain amount of time to elapse between when it moves and when the human is going to stick their hand on the board. So now I don't know if you've ever played chess, if you've ever been involved in chess, or maybe I used to play chess when I was in school or I was younger, and I've seen people that really thought they had you right, and they've got that move already preloaded. They're ready to make the move the minute that you take your hand away from the board. And I think that's probably what happened here. This young player reached out very, very fast to make a very quick response that was already sort of pre-planned in the kid's mind. And, you just reach out there and move it because you're like, I got you, oh, and apparently the arms swing around. So there's nothing to see here. Move along. And that's the news. Thanks, David. And we'll see you Friday for the wrap-up show.